Social media, it's all about sharing the personal, the professional, images, ideas, opinions. But in all that sharing, and sometimes oversharing, some wonder what the companies who provide those platforms do with all the reams of information they gather about us. And many, many others seem just not to care at all. So, is privacy a thing of the past? Let's ask. In Montreal, Quebec, Mitch Joel. He's president of Mirum, a global digital marketing and advertising agency. And here in studio, David Murakami Wood, Canada Research Chair in Surveillance Studies and Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology at Queen's University. Valerie Steeves, Associate Professor in the Department of Criminology at the University of Ottawa. And Kirsten Thompson, Partner at McCarthy Tétrault and the co-lead of their Cybersecurity, Privacy and Data Protection Group. What a star-studded panel we've got here today. Thanks, first of all, Mitch, for being there on the line in Montreal with us, and to all of you. And David, can I say, thanks for taking the ferry from Wolfe Island all the way, then hopping the train, I guess, to be with us today.
Yes, indeed.
Good, so good to have you all here. Let's just share some of these factoids of information about what's going on online. Instagram users like more than 1.7 billion photos per minute. Twitter users send nearly 350,000 tweets per minute. Facebook users like more than 4 million posts per minute. YouTube users upload 300 hours of video per minute. Snapchat users share more than 280,000 snaps per minute. Netflix subscribers stream more than 77,000 hours of video per minute. That's a lot of stuff going on online. Sheldon, perfect. Keep that shot if you would. I want to have a wide shot here in the studio. With all of that online activity happening, can I see a show of hands here? And Mitch, you can do this as well. We'll snap a shot of you every now and then too. Who expects the information that you are posting to be private? Hands up. You do. You don't. Mitch, how about you?
No hands.
No hands up there. We have one hand up. Okay, Steeves, I'm going to you first.
Okay.
You expect that information to be private.
It depends how you define the word expect. So I do a lot of research with young people who use these media and really incorporated them right into their daily lives. And what's interesting is that they do have expectations that that information will be private. A lot depends on who's posting, what they're posting, and why they're posting it. So just to give you a couple of quick examples, kids will often post hidden messages on Facebook. So if they want to communicate with their best friend, they'll use song lyrics because it's like a code. So they're able to have that private conversation even though they're doing it in a social media that's available to the broader public. We've also talked to young girls in particular who will blog, and they'll put their deepest secrets into this blog, and we'll say, so is that private or public? And they'll go, well, it's definitely private. And their feeling is that I post it, it's anonymous, and no one I know in my real life knows that that is me, that has anything to do with me. So it's private. Then if you follow up and say, well, does it, how do you feel about other people seeing it? They say, well, that doesn't matter. That's not part of my life because those people are just strangers. So the expectations of privacy, again, depend on whether you're asking, do you think corporations collect that? Sure, I do. There's nothing private on the internet. But do people expect to have it respected because it's private information? Definitely, they have expectations.
Mitch, are they nuts to have those expectations?
Well, I think the choice of words, expectations, is the real debate here. You can expect a million things, like winning the lottery. It doesn't necessarily mean it's pragmatic or based on anything in terms of what you've done from an educational standpoint or your own research. So they can expect it to be private from that perspective, but if they haven't been given initially any form of education of what it means to be on these platforms, how these platforms take this information, use this information, what the social contract is that they're engaging in when they sign up for these platforms. And if we don't take this down to literally down to elementary school to explain to every individual that whenever you post anything online, and it could even be in private messaging format, that is a form of media communications that can and probably will or might be used against you in the court of public opinion or in a court of law, then the failure really resides on us as a society in terms of what we've done to properly educate everybody about what this means. But to me, the word expectation is nominal because I expect to win the lottery. It's not pragmatic, it's not realistic, and it's not really based on any sense of reality.
Kirsten, you did not put your hand up, so you do not expect privacy when you put anything out there. Is that
I'm going
right?
to build on what Mitch was saying, and that it's all about the expectation. There's two words, expectation and privacy. And we can debate endlessly what privacy means, but I want to focus on the expectation piece because and this is where I'm going to sound like a lawyer, but it's a reasonable expectation of privacy. Part of that is what Mitch is talking about. How do you get people to have a reasonable expectation? These are corporate commercial platforms. These are not like the old phone lines of the day or the whispering over the garden fence. These are businesses with a business agenda. That business agenda is to at least break even, hopefully turn a profit. Now, do you expect a 14-year-old to understand that? Probably not, but the vast majority of users are adults and competent to make some decisions.
Before you disagree, I want to hear from David on this.
Well, I also disagree to an extent, but I probably disagree for different reasons from Val, so I'll let Val come back to that later. I mean, for me, the question of what privacy is pretty crucial here. I mean, I disagree largely because, as someone who studies these things, I know that corporations are collecting this data, are analysing it, are making all kinds of money off it. The state, intelligence services are collecting this, analysing it. So, as a matter of fact, sure, we have little privacy from that point of view. But it doesn't stop me hoping for privacy and not expecting this to be the only situation there can be now and forever.
Is it a foolish hope, though?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's precisely in having these debates and in starting to challenge the idea that there can be no privacy that we actually will reclaim some sense of not just privacy, but autonomy and, more to the point, control over our informational activities. And I think that's possible. And I think, just to lead into what I know Val is going to stay here, I don't agree that 14-year-olds have no idea what's going on. In fact, I think they use these platforms far more cleverly and far more ingeniously than most of us who keep thinking we can tell them how to do it.
Well, before you get in there, let me push back a little bit on that, because we've had Ann Cavoukian, the former Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, on this program in the past, and she, when she had that job, used to go into schools. I remember her telling the stories. She'd go into the schools and say, how many of you 14-year-old girls here have posted a picture of yourself half naked and sent it to your boyfriend, online and expected privacy? And the number of horrified faces that she sees when she then goes on to explain, this isn't private. You've basically shared it with the whole world. Are you sure that 14-year-olds have that expectation of privacy?
Well, this, I think, was where Val is better placed to answer it than me, because she's actually done the research. And with respect to Ann Cavoukian, even Ann Cavoukian has not done the actual research, and Val has. So.
Okay, Val, come on in.
There are two things that I'd like to respond to. The first one is this gap. I think what the discussion really illustrates is we've got a gap between the way people feel about their online lives and the kinds of social relationships that they hope to be able to achieve online, and this business model. And that gap, I think, is growing. So we've been in the field with the Media Smarts, Young Canadians, and Wired World Research Project since 2000. And in 2000, when you ask kids, hey, what do you feel about corporations online? They go, oh, I see a brand I know, that's my friend, I can trust them. 2004, we get, oh, I think they're watching, but why would they be looking at me? I'm totally uninteresting. I'm a 14-year-old goofy guy. So yes, I hear they're looking at me, but I don't really believe it. 2011, we go back and we hear a completely different discourse. They're looking at me all the time. They're manipulating me. It's creepy. What are these creepy old men in these corporations doing watching me? And when you hear creepy, it's really, really important to listen, because that means that the norms of visibility have been violated, and that is experienced as a privacy violation. It has nothing to do with the consent model that we rely upon in regulation. And just to finish up that piece, in 2013, we asked 5,500 kids across the country, do you know that corporations are collecting information? Sure, we know that. We've been educated in that way. That's part of the media curriculum that's in every jurisdiction in the country. That's part of media education. Yes, we know that. We asked a follow-up question. Who should be able to see what you post on social media? 83% of kids said that the corporation that owns the site should not be able to see what they post on social media.
Let me get Mitch's feedback on that.
It goes up to 95% when you use the word marketer. So there's a huge gap in these expectations.
Mitch, come on in here. They're coming after you.
Marketers are trusted less than lawyers and car salesmen? I'm shocked.
We can debate that later.
Yeah. So this is the sort of paradox of these channels, right? People want to use these channels to connect and be engaged, and as was previously remarked, these are businesses. They are not doing this for the social good. And while organizations like Facebook can come out and say that their mission statement is to connect the world, the underlying mission statement is for profit. And again, when you have 14-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 55-year-olds who have this new format to connect and to exchange for free, no monthly fee, no installation fees, et cetera, if they're not aware at core that the value to the company to generate that income is actually coming from them, that's the problem, right? You got to look around, and if you don't see the product, you're the product. And this is, again, a sort of general sentiment that we can feel bad that 14-year-olds, 55-year-olds don't understand that. But that is the construct of the economics of it. They are deriving a tremendous amount of value from it, and the exchange of that value isn't monetary, it's information. Whether that information is being used poorly or creepily, because I agree more often than not, especially now as this new advertising technology is being implemented, it's looking more creepy than good. It'll evolve and hopefully get better optimized and be more relevant. But this is the moment we find ourselves in. And again, I think the discourse that we're having here is fantastic. The problem is the people who are probably watching this are sophisticated enough already to understand this. We have to take this information and disseminate it not just down to younger people, but across all demographics and psychographics. The primary issue I see is in the fact that the parents don't even know. And so it's hard for them to educate when they're the ones screaming, I want privacy, and all they're doing is posting pictures of their kids from pre-birth all the way on up. I mean, I'm aghast at the fact that potentially there may be a picture of me when I was 14 that might come out on Facebook. I don't want that. And yet suddenly these parents who are screaming for privacy are busy tracking and providing all of this information, which, by the way, has major ramifications for these young individuals later on in life in what could be insurance, health, medical, employment, et cetera, et cetera. So this becomes this massive sort of thing that we haven't even really begun to scratch the surface on.
Let me help scratch that surface by reading an excerpt here from something that Jacob Morgan wrote in Forbes a couple of years ago. He wrote, I think we've clearly reached a point in today's world where privacy is pretty much a lost cause. Our information is already out there, and regardless of how hard we scream that we want it back or want it to be secure, it's not going to happen ever. If anything, we are seeing a shift towards more openness, more transparency, and less privacy. Kirsten, you agree?
Sort of. Privacy is the ability to control personal information. It's not necessarily the ability to keep it from the world. So there's an onus on the person who controls that information, me, the 14-year-old, the 55-year-old, to think about what they're doing. Where I think these things fall down, these constructs fall down, is in the education component. Some of that is the people who are manipulating the information. Some of that is on the people who are putting the information out there. If there's an understanding and a control of what you can do, that speaks to the transparency issue. And generally speaking, people want to know what's happening, and then they can make those decisions. They don't like decisions being made for them, either positively or negatively, from a government regulatory perspective or from a corporation doing things they weren't told about. Where I see a gap is people are generally okay with the collection of information. I will put this on this platform. I will disclose that. I will put it out there. Where it breaks down is around the use. You don't anticipate the use to which this information is going to be put. And
the use by others.
By others. And a good example of that is if you talk to a 14-year-old or 15-year-old about the information that's going up there, they don't care. Identity theft, I'm 14, no one's going to steal my identity. Do I have stuff you're going to take? I don't have a credit card. I don't have a lot invested in the system yet. If you ask that same question of 55-year-olds, they suddenly get very anxious about privacy, leaving aside the whole generational understanding. They have stuff that they can lose. They're more invested in the system. Identity theft is a big concern. They've got credit cards. Anyone who's had to replace a credit card knows how time-consuming that can be. So there's that real gap in terms of what it is you're protecting or you think you're protecting. If you're 14, you have a different understanding. If you ask a 14-year-old that question about, do you care if Facebook has the information? They don't care.
They don't
if you ask if your mother has that information, well, that's a whole different conversation.
That they care about. But can we follow up, Val, on that stereotype? The assumption is that the millennials in particular, and those even younger than them, couldn't care at all how much information about their private lives is out there, and they're happy to have that kind of transparency.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
I've done research in this field for 20 years. And every single time you sit down with kids and say, do you care about privacy? If you have, through qualitative methodology where you have a more sophisticated discussion with kids, they care hugely. And they modify their behavior in order to achieve some kind of privacy. So the reason kids told us in 2000 why they loved network technologies was because they were private. Their parents couldn't find them. No adult could find them. Suddenly they had a way that they could explore the world outside of them because they weren't allowed to play in the backyard anymore, kind of thing. So they saw it as a private space. As it became far less private when we were in the field in 2011, they now perceive of it as a surveillance space. They complain about privacy. They complain about surveillance on the part of their parents and a part of their schools and a part of corporations. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about kids' experiences. Kids are not any better with these technologies than adults. They can post a zillion videos of kittens in about 2 seconds flat. But in actual fact, their ability to manage information and learn has declined with these kinds of technologies.
Let me get Mitch on that. Is that your understanding, Mitch?
Look, privacy is also not a zero-sum game where every bit of information I put is, quote unquote, the private stuff. And so where I sort of lean brands towards, and even individuals across the sort of general spectrum of consumers, because my world is that of business, I talk about it in two buckets to simplify it a little bit. One is there's your private information, name, address, credit card information. We're going to hope that businesses have gotten permission from you to have it to create the transaction, and that's in the lockbox, not touchable. On the other side of information that could be considered private, that we keep in that spectrum of definition, is the stuff that is more personable. It's the stuff that creates a more personalized experience. And so, you know, my joke is, if you go on Amazon right now, you're like, this is amazing. It knows all these things about me, and it's showing me all the stuff I like and fantastic. If you log out of your account and go on Amazon, it's a terrible experience because it's just a smorgasbord of stuff. You don't know where to go. You don't know anything about it. And if you can separate that sort of credit card personal information in the lockbox with, the more I use and engage in this, that information creates a better personalized experience for me. The social exchange between myself and the organization is of value. I am explicit and implicit in my exchange of that information and knowledge of it. That's fine. The problem is you then have brands, and I'm not saying Amazon does this, but other brands do, where there's retargeting or there's information being fed into the browser, not the actual brand or business, and then that creates that allure of creepy, which I think is a very, very real phenomenon. You're like, I was looking for a piece of luggage, and suddenly this piece of luggage is following me around like luggage all over the internet. And so the problems of looking at it and saying, is this privacy versus can we at least agree that we're going to take the private information, and that's the stuff that really is what I would call the hackable stuff that we don't want out in the world, versus my usage. And because I'm engaged in that brand and I'm enjoying that more personalized experience, whether it's a social network or an e-commerce platform, that there is a value in doing that, and that I'm happily giving more information on my mobile device, location, other information where I physically am, to provide me with a better experience. And I think consumers are really enjoying that side of it. They may not understand it. They may not be comfortable if they actually saw the amount of information they're giving to get that back. But there is that component of it. And so I'm big on private information versus personalizable information.
Gotcha. David.
Yeah, I want to get back to that issue of creepiness. I mean, because I think one of the things we're not really talking about here is how new all this is. I mean, we've all, seem to be assuming now that Facebook's been around forever. I mean, for some of Val's, the people who Val's studying, maybe that's true. But for us, let's not forget, 10 years, really, since people started using Facebook on a big scale. Social media, only 15 years altogether. The internet, only 30 years for most people. I mean, even 20 for some people. So this is a new area, right? And we should not expect that somehow all the social problems associated with this area have been solved. So you can't really say something like, there's going to be no privacy forever from now on, based on this tiny amount of experience. Privacy's been around a lot longer than that. It's not going to disappear in 10 years. It'll change dramatically. So what I'm saying here, I think, is that we have yet to evolve social norms, ways of behaving with each other online that are in any way to be considered the same as those that exist in wider society.
But do you see a priority right now among users, among institutions in society to try to reclaim that privacy that many people fear is now going?
Absolutely, and not just reclaim it, to make new kinds of privacy. I mean, I think one of the things here is we shouldn't be looking backwards all the time. We shouldn't be saying the kind of privacy that Justice Brandeis talked about in the 19th century, the right to be let alone, that's all there is. We should be thinking about how can we reconstruct privacy or make new kinds of rights online. Why should it be the same rights as we had before? Why not have more?
You want to give me a for instance on that?
Well, what about group privacy? One of the ways in which one might think of, for example, the way in which the people that Val is studying talk about themselves is they're actually talking about themselves as a group, as small groups, friends, circles of acquaintances, and so on. Our privacy law is largely configured around the individual, right? It's about individual rights, and that's the kind of classic model in which law works in most Western countries. But actually, that isn't really necessarily the best fit for how people are understanding privacy in an age of, quite right, sharing and transparency to some. but closure and secrecy to others. So how do we reconfigure the way we think about privacy around that notion that it's not just about the individual or even private information of individual information, but about groups, about which groups one shares with, which groups one does not share with, and how can we make law and social practice work that way?
Let me pick up on the law because...
The other side of that
Sorry,
is...
stand by, Mitch, 1 second, because I do want to follow up on the law angle there. And you said a few minutes ago you hated to be sounding like a lawyer, but I actually need a lawyer right now. Do companies need to get our consent for the information they have about us that they pick up through our metadata and all of the other information they glean when we use all of these social media sites?
I'm going to start by working off of what he said to pick up your point.
Okay.
So he's absolutely right. This is a new area. I mean, I remember when the internet started, and I just sound like I'm 80 now, but to your point, that's 20 years ago.
Wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago. And not only are individuals struggling with that, companies are struggling to understand what all of this means and what they can do with this information. And the law is struggling with that. Canadian law, the decisions, there's very few decisions on this, trying to define what this looks like. A private right of action for a breach of privacy is very, very new in Canada. The privacy legislation is relatively new, and it's based on this idea that an individual has been harmed and then has a right to claim. And we also have a relatively new class actions regime in Canada. And where these things stumble, and you see very tortured discussions in the law about what right it is, what constellation of things you can sue about and you can fight about, and then even if they find there's been a breach of privacy, what does that mean? What do damages look like? And the courts have very much struggled with understanding what damages are. Is it emotional distress? Is it harm to reputation? Is it tangibles? I've lost my credit card, so I get that money replaced. What do damages look like? Which brings us to consent. So if you need to consent, and by and large, there's different types of consents. There's implied consent. If I use this, I can reasonably expect the following uses or collection or disclosures to occur. There's also express consent, which is a higher standard of consent. I have to check a box, tell you that I'm good with this. There's also informed consent. I have to have a reasonable understanding of what you're going to do and collect. That's where the consent model can break down. Now, if I'm a company trying desperately to work within all this shifting expectations of my customers, shifting expectations of the law, and trying to draft a policy for my website, it becomes very, very difficult. The vast majority of my clients want to comply, but they don't know what they're complying with.
Because the sands are ever shifting underneath our feet.
And they're very sensitive to issues of transparency and reputational impact. No one wants to be the company that's hung out to dry because they got something wrong.
Right. Mitch, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily prescribe to what I'm hearing 100%. I don't think it's new. I think that we are in somewhere between a 20 to 30-year phase of commercialization of the internet, and that we can say it's new, but governments, societies, educational infrastructures, business have had plenty of time, 30, 20, 15 years. And I think it really is incumbent on us to stop having these debates and start doing the things that matter to move the needle and get them to go forward. And to sort of go back to where I was thinking also is I think about from a professional standpoint, something like LinkedIn. You can option not to be a part of that, but if you want to be part of the workforce, if you want to be findable, if you want somebody to see both your professional and your volunteer and communal reputation, there's probably no better place if you're going to do anything as an executive than to have that profile filled out there. And I think what's most important about this is that by not having some form of transparency, by not giving up some of what may be considered your privacy, where you went to school, charitable organizations you might be involved in, that you're actually opting out of something potentially greater, which can be problematic, but also I think something interesting. If I'm looking to employ someone or partner with somebody and they don't have a LinkedIn profile, that's a huge question mark in my eyes. What is there to hide? Why can't you let people know what school you went to or charitable groups you're involved with? So a lot of the paradigms we have of how we've defined privacy fall down in this era, and I don't necessarily think that they're bad or you're giving anything up. In fact, more often than not, I look at a lot of things as that fair and equitable exchange of information. That's just my own personal take on it.
Okay, Val and then David.
I'm going to pick up on what David said. I think he's right that if we want to move forward, as you're suggesting, Mitch, that we need to look a little bit more critically at the unintended consequences of the system that we've created. So about 5 years ago, my colleague Jane Bailey and I started a project called the eGirls Project. And we wanted to talk to young women, girls and young women, about the performance of gender in social media. And we naively went out there and thought, this is going to be fabulous. We're going to find all sorts of ways where kids have used this technology to break stereotypes and create new ways of being girl. We found the absolute opposite. And their explanation to us was that they are embedded in this commercial environment that privileges very narrow gender stereotypes. They're everywhere. And as more commercialization has occurred, their ability to perform away from the stereotype has actually shrunk. So those like buttons that you were talking about that get pressed every million times a second, they hate the like button because the like button judges them and their ability to conform to this very narrow stereotype. Now, as part of a business plan seeking to deal with huge amounts of data, it makes sense to use algorithms to try to profile individuals so you can slot them into different consumer categories. But from a human point of view, there are unintended consequences that occur. Some groups get discriminated against. Some groups find that there's more pressure to conform to particular norms which are not driven from any of their own understanding of who they are, and they certainly don't want to live in that kind of environment. So I think it is time to think about new kinds of rights and new ways of understanding privacy that allow us not to go backwards and destroy social media as we know it, but critically assess the unintended consequences of the system we've created.
David, it's also changing who we are, which is the most fascinating part. I mean, it is showing people to be more narcissistic, the selfie culture. It is showing, if you look at magazines like The Guardian or Quartz and the research they've done recently, in terms of the social anxiety that sort of comes with this idea of everything I do, I need to share and have validated versus the experience of being in the moment. And again, all of that is tied into privacy, but it creates this greater construct of the type of humanity that we're actually building and developing as this technology integrates with our lives.
Well, yeah, and I think, but I shouldn't assume that the kind of marketing constructs of what constitutes, a new type of humanity is what everybody wants to be, and I think that's exactly the point here. Marketers are certainly trying to make people conform to certain kinds of stereotypes. It's not just about finding out what people are, it's actually about pre-creating kinds of marketable categories into which people can be fitted. And I think that is profoundly dangerous, and it's something that we really need to deal with. I mean, that wasn't the point I was wanting to make here, it's just Mitch actually nicely brought up something that I wanted to talk about.
You wanted to tap down there.
Yeah,
okay.
but I mean, the main point I wanted to make was an earlier thing that had been said about this is the idea this is an equitable exchange of information. I wonder what basis we have for even saying that. I mean, we don't even know what information is worth in any real sense. You can make statements about what this piece of information is worth, what that piece of information is worth, but really it's really only worth something when it's aggregated and in big data kind of form. And so what any individual's information is worth is very difficult to determine in that context. And how is this decision made, right? You have this big privacy consent form in front of you, pages and pages in some cases, and there's been research done on how big these end-user licensing agreements have become and the privacy agreements within them. Facebook's has expanded from being a couple of sentences to being pages.
And no one reads it.
No one reads it. We know from the research that no one
signed
reads it.
consent forms to appear on here, and not one of us read them, and they were a paragraph and a half.
I read
it.
Did you really?
I'm a lawyer.
Okay, you'd be the first person who ever read those consent
I
forms.
don't know. I got it in law school. I always look for the big red hand.
But I mean, the point here is that we're not given the opportunity to even engage in a fair and discussion on the basis of informed consent. Okay. That does not exist.
All right, let's play. Sheldon, I'm on chapter 5 here. Let's do roll in number 2. This is college humor. You like this one. Somebody poking fun at people who change their Facebook status to say that Facebook can't use their private information. Roll it, please.
Recently, many of you have been posting this message to your Facebook walls, declaring that by doing so, Facebook has no legal right to your content.
By posting that, here's what you're actually declaring.
I don't know how laws work.
I think legal terms are magic words that can force people to do what I want.
I believe a wall post is a binding legal contract that can override a terms of service agreement.
The agreement you clicked yes to without reading in 2004.
I make knee-jerk decisions based on fear.
Like an animal.
Declaring something on your Facebook wall doesn't make it true.
Okay, that's pretty funny, but, ... lawyer, come on in.
It signals an intention. It doesn't necessarily bind you. Those terms of use and terms of service are there for a reason. That's partly how I make my living. Do I wish that they were clearer? Yes, for my own sake, for my client's sake. This circles right back to informed consent, and there's an obligation on both parties to a contract to understand what that means. Do I think that there should be short statements about what the use of the information should be? Yes, and companies, some of them anyways, are trying to do that. But there's also research studies that show no matter how short you make it and how simplistic you make it, there's still not a good understanding of what happens to things.
Why not?
And because it's quickly evolving, and a good example is back to the 16-year-olds who are kind of iffy on what information goes out there. They don't understand the ramifications, and I barely keep up with this. So some of the clients I work with are very complicated companies that underwrite credit. They give you loans on the basis of not traditional bank metrics, mortgage, that sort of thing. They do it on the basis of a whole constellation of data points, and they have an algorithm that runs and says whether or not you're creditworthy. None of those data points, or very few of those data points, are what we would call traditional markers. So not transactions, not mortgage, not bank accounts. These are things like, what kind of car do you drive? Do you own a car? What social media platforms are you on? What type of phone are you using? And these algorithms are quite sophisticated and underwrite credit agreements.
And a better way of judging risk?
Apparently.
Apparently, okay.
But no 16-year-old in the world has any idea that 20 years of data that he's laid down is going to affect a credit decision made 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 12 years from now. So that's the distinction of where this information goes and how it's used.
Go ahead, Val.
Okay. There's a trajectory here that I think we're ignoring. So I do research with kids, and my research is very similar to what's been done in England and parts of Europe and in the States. You sit down with 11 and 12-year-olds, and you will have a very sophisticated conversation that goes like this. I would never post anything like that on Facebook because I want to get a job when I'm 18. I understand there are consequences to this, and they're very much aware of it. They say, I'm glad my parents are with me because I want to make good decisions online.
Young people get that?
11 and 12.
11 and 12, okay.
Then you hit 13. And everything changes because you've gone from kids who are experiencing and expressing an identity that's nested within their family and that's demonstrated by displaying photos of kittens on their virtual wall to a developmental stage where human beings experiment with who they are. They try on different things and they come to know themselves by placing themselves into a network of other people. So they're developmentally predisposed to go a little wild and to experiment and do all these types of things. But however, they have strategies and they have norms. So you brought up sexting earlier. Somebody brought up sexting earlier. And so when you sit and you talk to kids about sexting, it's really interesting because they'll talk about the privacy implications. So you've got to be careful because if it goes like this. If a girl takes a picture of herself and sends it to her boyfriend, well, I wouldn't do it myself, but I understand she's just being a good girlfriend. We should be asking questions about that. But if he sends it along, her reputation is shot.
Exactly.
She's slut-shamed. He, absolutely, no consequences to him. So the response has been, you have to be safe when you send a sext. Only send a sexless sext. I mean, a headless sext, pardon me. So
no identifying
the
features.
idea is if my head's not on it, you can't tell who it is. So a colleague of mine, Jessica Ringrose in England, has done work in London on sexting. And boys felt that this meant that the value of that sext went down for them because they wanted to prove that they just didn't download this off the internet. So they now have had, in her research study, she found that they would have girls take lipstick and write the boy's name on their chest and do the headless sext. So they're negotiating privacy and publicity. They're negotiating how they're using these new media and the expectations that are placed upon them because it's such a highly commodified and commercialized space. So they're not naive about it, but they're developmentally disposed to display and to experiment. Once they hit 20, 22, 25, they start to act like you and me when it comes to online media.
Well, sometimes I do. Go ahead, Mitch.
There's a huge statement in there that I don't want to sort of just wash over and move on to the next one, which is when we're speaking to young people about it, the general sentiment we'll say to them is, don't put anything online that imagine mom or dad are watching you. And the real iteration of that isn't that. The real iteration is imagine the whole world is watching you. Well, I don't care about the whole world, but everybody in your family, your grandparents, your siblings, future employers, and you sort of start going into the grade of the sort of conversation we just had. My sort of laughing half joke back to that is, you want to be employable. Don't you want to be able to get a job? And if all this stuff is out there, et cetera, it builds character, et cetera. The reality is, though, is if everybody is doing it, who are we going to hire? And I think that that's the bigger part, is that the construct of how that communication is transforming from full-on shot to headless shot to lipstick on the chest is very, very dynamic of the fluid environment that we find ourselves in. And I think us older people who aren't, as Don Tapscott would have said, bathed in bits, have to really figure out what these new definitions are, because that is their feedback. Well, if it's going to ruin my reputation, it's everybody's reputation. So nobody's hireable, nobody's insurable, then what?
But again, we're defaulting to a commercial model, because
Exactly.
I don't think the question is, will I be able to get a job when I'm 25? The question is, what kind of human being do I want to be?
And also, why should companies know anything about what I do in my private life? What business is it of theirs? The idea that's actually come up really within the last 20 years, that companies should be able to pry into your private life, to know what you do out of office hours, is actually not something which I think we should be encouraging or taking as read. In fact, that's one of the places we should be starting this debate, is saying, actually, what should be known to different people, and why, and what actual reason is there for a company that just wants your time, for you to do a job in a certain way and to do it well? If you do that, what is their interest in any other aspect of your life?
Let me follow up with this. There is every possibility that 10 and 20 years from now, once the millennials are basically running all the and have all the good jobs in society, that their attitudes about privacy will prevail then as well, and none of this will matter because they have a completely different view about privacy.
They do indeed, but of course, as Val said, that's actually quite a complicated attitude, and it's not actually what we think it, we generally say that it is. It's certainly not that privacy is dead. I mean, we can't anticipate how we're going to make future law in 25 years' time, but we can certainly start to not cut down the possibilities for future generations, I think. And the worst thing we could do now is try and lock in some kind of system which means that we really can't get out of it, and privacy really is dead. And that will be the worst thing. I think what we've got to do is allow for certain kinds of values at least to be available to future generations for them to use, and not to cut them out entirely.
Okay,
This
we're
is
done.
exactly the evolution you see in the common law. It's a very iterative, very slow process as they grapple with individual problems that arrive before the court. Is it intended to solve all of society's ills? No. Courts and law look at what the fundamental values are, and they are fixed in time. Anybody who's read a decision back from 1822 thinks it's outrageously laughable.
We're down to our last couple of minutes here, Val. So how do we make privacy work for us and still take advantage of what social media have to offer? That's a sweet spot that I guess we're still trying to find.
Well, I think that to a large extent, it means pushing back against the commercial model. And my concern right now is that the regulatory model legitimizes a certain kind of collection. We pretend consent means it. Young people will tell you, yeah, I press the consent button because I have no choice. I want to connect with my 200 closest friends, so I push the button. I know that it's not going to get me what I want. It seems to me that instead we should be looking for models that are much more respectful of people's own intentions when it comes to their social lives. So actually, if you look at Facebook as an example, the ability to control your own information has just gone down, down, down every year because they're trying to commodify it more and more. Even if you had more audience control, if there was an ability to opt out of systems, if there were constraints around this broad-based commercial collection, I think we'd end up with a much better system that fit people's needs better.
Mitch, let me give you the last word on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that sentiment. I think it comes down to the self and figuring out, based off of these platforms and channels, what do you want to share? What are your boundaries? And you guide yourself accordingly. People don't know whether I'm married, how many kids I have, if I have kids, things like that. I've created boundaries around that. Technology, it's ambiguous. It sends you the notification. It sets you to the default. I think we can't rely on the technology to do that for us. I think we as a society have to decide as people what type of information is going to make me more personable while still maintaining my privacy. And I'm not holding myself up as a sort of lighthouse to this, but again, my phone doesn't ring, my phone doesn't vibrate. I have a specific notification for when my spouse needs to text me or connect to me. I'm not that person where it's ringing off the hook all the time. And people can't. You have to control technology. You can't let technology control you. And I don't think we can rely on the technology to do this. I think we have to set the parameters as people.
David has set the parameters. You just said you don't have a phone?
Nope.
You don't carry a cell phone or a device? Nothing?
Nope.
Actually, one of the things that's really surprising is that we're increasingly hearing from young people that I'm getting off technology. I'm taking a 6-month vacation from Facebook, and they've moved to phones because they perceive them as more private. So I think you're onto something with that.
This goes to something very fundamental here, and at no point has anyone lost a choice. You don't have to use these platforms. You don't have to use any of this. Now,
No, but
in the
they're
modern
irresistible
world,
in the modern world.
but you can also curate them. I'm like Mitch. I have a curated profile out there. So you see certain things, you don't see certain things.
David, last 30 seconds to you.
Like
I
us,
was
and I
gonna
think,
say,
But you've been talking about the
yeah.
14-year-olds that use code and modify things. If they're as sophisticated as you say, then I'm the generation that's doomed because I'll never be able to get any of that commodified information out of the situation that they're. I messed with Netflix and Amazon and my profile because I don't want them, whoever them is, doing that creepy stalking thing. So you watch one rom-com and your profile is messed.
Well,
Same with Amazon. You can game the
Yeah,
system.
I think one of the key points, though, is here there is no we in the simple sense.
Right.
Like, we are four,
Exactly.
5 white privileged people talking here. There are so many social divisions, I mean, about which, you know, there is no control for some people. Think of how Facebook is operating in India, trying to push in there and grab the entire internet.
David, one thing I can't control is
It's
that we're
time.
going to lose our satellite in 10 seconds. So, Mitch Joel, thanks for being on the program from Montreal. I want to say goodbye to you before we lose you. Good to have you on TVO again, Mitch. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And here in our studio, David Murakami Wood, the Canada Research Chair at Queen's University. Thanks for making the long schlep from Wolfe Island and then on the train to our studios here in Toronto. Kirsten Thompson from McCarthy Tetro, Valerie Steeves from the University of Ottawa. Great to have everybody with us for this discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.